"You are Roboute Guilliman," said the mysterious space marine as he stopped outside the Primarch's cell.
"And you are one of the Lion's sons. You keep questionable company, Dark Angel. Who are you, and why are you here?"
"I can free you," replied the hooded figure, deigning not to answer the Primarch's questions. Realizing that no further explanation was forthcoming, Guilliman frowned.
"Can, not will. What do you want in return?"
"You will take me to Terra, to the throne." Even bound in sorceress chains, the Primarch's presence was immense, his steady glare thunderous, yet the Dark Angel stood, unwavering, like a statue carved from granite. Guilliman strained once more against his bonds, and once again found them unyielding.
"It seems that my choices are to rot here or accede to your demand. The former would be to fail in my duty, so I suppose it will have to be the latter. But understand this, Dark Angel. If you seek to trick or manipulate me, nothing in this galaxy will save you."
One corner of Cypher's mouth lifted into a small, bitter smile. "As you say," he muttered. That right there was one of my favourite moments from Warhammer 40k of all time. Roboute Guilliman had just returned to the Imperium, and he decided to make for Terra, to commune with his father. However, the Servants of Chaos had other ideas, and during this crusade, Guilliman was captured and imprisoned within a blackstone fortress of the Red Corsairs, who had aid from Kairos Fateweaver. Only by the intervention of this mysterious Dark Angel and his Harlequin allies was the Avenging Sun able to escape. Cypher, the Lord of the Fallen, is, as his name suggests, a mystery. He is almost never seen without that massive blade on his back, yet he has never wielded it, and none of his enemies seem to know what this blade is or its purpose. However, when Roboute Guilliman, the Lord of Ultramar, met Cypher, he recognized it instantly, for few know that blade as well as the Avenging Sun, for that is the blade that he broke. We now know that Cypher roams the Imperium with the Lion Sword on his back, a blade gifted to the Lord of the First by the Emperor himself. So now that the Lion has returned, will Cypher return the Lion Sword to its rightful owner? For 10,000 years he has kept it, and for 10,000 years the Dark Angels have chased him and hated him above all others. He has eluded capture since the catastrophic fall of Caliban, the original homeworld of the Dark Angels. Cypher has appeared in each of the 5 segmentums, and each time he materializes as if from nowhere. Wherever he surfaces, he brings with him death and destruction, although whether he is the culprit or merely a herald of woe is unclear. The allegiance of Cypher is entirely unknown. He has been seen single-handedly saving hordes of beleaguered Imperial defenders, but likewise he has allied with the Servants of Chaos and even Xenos. Moreover, at times, whether intentionally or not, Cypher has led the enemies of the Imperium into disaster. Cypher seldom instigates the violent acts that invariably occur. It is rather that he seems to act as a catalyst, fanning the hatred and mistrust of those around him into a raging fire. Cypher has developed one of the most tremendous habits in the galaxy. Just when you think you have him cornered, all of a sudden he vanishes, leaving destruction in his wake. And it's not just the Dark Angels who seek this elusive figure. Inquisitors have heard whispers of this mysterious robed space marine, and even Chaos Space Marines seek more knowledge about the cryptic figure that weaves in and out of their strongholds. But they have always failed to catch their quarry, for whenever there is word of Cypher, the Dark Angels are never far behind. To remain undetected whilst being hunted by the Dark Angels, Cypher must mask his movements at all times, and one way you can mask your movements is through the sponsor for today's video, Surfshark VPN. A VPN is a virtual private network and is great for keeping your online identity safe by encrypting all of the information sent between your device and the internet, protecting your personal data from big companies and cybercriminals. Surfshark does not monitor, track or store any data on you. This means no connection or activity logs. Furthermore, a VPN swaps the real location of your device with a new one, also known as changing your IP address. This way you can virtually travel to any country around the globe, and Surfshark has over 3,200 servers in 100 countries. So on holiday, no worries, switch your virtual location to back home so you don't miss out on any of your favourite shows. And the best part, bypass censorship everywhere. So for example, on the UK Netflix, I don't have access to the latest season of Rick and Morty, but I can just open Surfshark VPN and switch my location to Australia, and there we go, wubba lubba dub dub. So get an exclusive Surfshark Black Friday deal, and enter promo code SANDMAN for up to 6 additional months for free at surfshark.deals/Sandman. Cypher was originally a title within the Order of Caliban, a tradition that was kept by the Lion when he integrated Calibanite customs into his legion. The Lord Cypher was a ceremonial role for much of its history. He relinquished his name and became an important figurehead for the Order and later the Dark Angels. During the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, the Sons of the Lion were known to redouble their efforts when fighting alongside such a legendary figure. There are at least 3 known Lord Cyphers within the novels. The first was an elderly standard human of the Order who advised the Lion and Luther during the campaign against the Great Beasts. After his death, his replacement would come to serve under Luther as rebellion stirred on Caliban. But his tenure did not last, for he was slain by Zahariel El-Zurias, a powerful psyker who then took the position. Though Zahariel's views did not always align with Luther's, Zahariel's hatred for the Lion was not matched by many of the traitorous Dark Angels. For his mind had been twisted by a powerful device known as the Ouroboros, and he had learned that the Lion had brutally killed his cousin Nemiel during the heresy. Zahariel became an important member of Luther's retinue when they plotted to achieve Calibanite independence. A surprising development would occur, however, when Corswain, Paladin Captain of the Ninth Order, loyal son of the Lion, would reunite with Luther towards the end of the Horus Heresy. Corswain and his forces had been fighting against traitors across the Imperium and were unaware of the treachery fomenting on Caliban. Corswain declared to Luther his intention to make for Terra and fight for the Emperor during the siege. Luther gave reinforcements from Caliban, but within those numbers were Zahariel and other members of the Fallen. Together, Zahariel and Corswain would fight on Terra, claiming the Astronomicon so that it could be relit and reinforcements could reach the birthworld of humanity. Zahariel's position inspired the Dark Angels, but his psychic talents and knowledge were most vital, especially for the purpose of relighting the Astronomicon. So during the latter stages of the siege, he asked Corswain to take over his position. Whether or not Corswain fully rose to the challenge is yet to be known. One thing is sure, however. Luther's account tells us that both Dark Angels survived the Siege of Terra, and would later duel during the destruction of Caliban. Luther is certain only one of them would have left that encounter alive. Who emerged victorious and who took the mantle of Cypher, becoming the most legendary gunslinger in all of Warhammer 40K, is still yet to be revealed. Whatever his original name, 10,000 years later, Cypher has become one of the most peculiar characters in the galaxy, wielding his 2 pistols, carrying the Lion Sword, and working towards some unknown goal. In the 41st millennium, for example, Cypher would even turn himself in to the Dark Angels and be subject to the tortures of Asmodai. Yet his actions would ultimately help ruin the goals of the traitor Typhus and a senior member of the Fallen, Astalan. And naturally, after the battle, Cypher managed to vanish before the Dark Angels were able to recapture him. Then he would be sought out by the Harlequin's Shadowseer Silandri Veilwalker to help her free the resurrected Roboute Guilliman and aid him in reaching Terra. The Terran Crusade was a tumultuous journey, however, it was a success, and so Roboute Guilliman took Cypher and his fallen brethren to the Imperial Palace. However, under the orders of the Custodians, only the Primarch would be permitted to pass alone into the throne room. All others would have to wait outside. At this, Cypher stiffened, his hands straying towards his holstered pistols. Guilliman had expected this moment and had planned for it accordingly. The hooded Dark Angel and his men had upheld their end of the bargain, granting Guilliman his freedom on the Blackstone Fortress. Yet the Primarch was not foolish enough to trust such an ominous figure blindly, especially one who for some reason was working with the Harlequins of the Veiled Path. He might not have recognized Cypher, but he knew the blade on the Dark Angel's back. The sight of it made him shudder with dread. He would not permit such a thing into his father's presence. Stepping aside, Guilliman commanded the Custodian Guard to apprehend Cypher and his warriors. Their presence was a riddle, one that could be solved once more pressing matters had been attended to. Cypher responded with the first show of emotion any there had seen from him. He snarled in anger, ripping his pistols from their holsters before hesitating for one crucial moment, visibly torn between attempting escape and making a doomed lunge for the doorway above. In that second, the Custodians closed in with their guardian spears levelled. Cypher and his followers found themselves surrounded in a ring of crackling blades. Slowly, his half-seen expression grim, Cypher holstered his weapons, and he and his brothers knelt in submission before their captors. Wrists bound with electrocuffs, they were led away by stern custodians and locked away within a warded prison block that, for thousands of years, not a single inmate had escaped. In just a few short hours, however, Cypher would do just that. For many years, that was all the lore we had on Cypher's arrival at the Imperial Palace and his mysterious escape from the dark cells of Terra, which occurred around the same time that the Great Rift opened and spread across the galaxy. However, with Cypher, Lord of the Fallen by John French, we now have a pretty clear picture of how Cypher escaped and the crazy things that happened next. This book is written from Cypher's point of view. However, he is a pretty unreliable narrator. He often tells the reader that he might just be lying and in fact seems quite insane a lot of the time. Nevertheless, it appears that Cypher may even have planned on being captured and long ago orchestrated the escape of both his fallen brethren and himself, going to some extreme lengths to do so. It's suggested 300 years ago, somehow Cypher created like a heart attack in a Mechanicus worker. The last device he worked on would end up being used in the Dark Cells. So because he had a heart attack right at that time, that piece came out slightly faulty. And so when the Great Rift happened, I think it's a third of the Dark Cells open. And some like crazy stuff, as you can imagine, comes out of the Dark Cells. The Custodians have to fight. I think they do say that most of the stuff is captured or killed. So slightly less 40k MacGuffins in the 40k galaxy than people were worried about, because everything from the Dark Cells being out would have been a nightmare. But it's a really cool scene. And yeah, that starts off this kind of heist. And this is seemingly planned by Cypher.
Yeah, it is absolutely fascinating. It does kind of read a little bit like Ocean's 11, but Warhammer.
It does, especially at the end. So, after this particularly wild stroke of luck, Cypher and the Fallen escape and attempt to make it to the Throneroom. However, even though Terra was in turmoil, they were pursued with extreme prejudice. Throughout the course of the story, they battle servants of chaos, assassins, and even custodians. In particular, the custodian warden Hecaron of the Shadowkeepers works to track them down and imprison them once more. His job was guarding the dark cells, and so he cannot allow Cypher to make it to the Throneroom. And as this is a story about Cypher, of course, the Dark Angels are soon to arrive. There's a bunch of Deathwing arrive in the system. They're not in Deathwing Terminator, but they're in like normal plate. And they're in the system, I believe, to alert the Imperium as to the return of Magnus the Red, because they've just come from the Siege of Fenris. However, Magnus the Red actually beat them to Terra. So the Battle of Luna has just happened. Guilliman is on the throne world. These Dark Angels are learning that Guilliman's back, but they are like, we've got to focus, because they kind of hear over the Vox link, oh yeah, someone's been captured. Apparently, like, his name's Cypher. So as soon as they hear that, they go nuts. The Great Rift is opening. All these warp storms are causing havoc everywhere. If you've followed my channel for a while, you'll know that even in Comora, this is causing a problem. So for Terra, it's an absolute nightmare. And there's debris falling on the planet and all this kind of thing. And so the Dark Angels have it's quite a cool plan, I think. Again, heist movie. They kind of like pretend they're debris and drop down, and so they can kind of avoid getting shot by the defense turrets. One of them actually fails, and so he says, brother, you know what to do, to the pilot. And so this Dark Angels pilot deliberately crashes the plane so it will destroy him, the plane, and everyone on board in such a way no one can be recognized. It starts off very hardcore. So the Dark Angels are taking this very seriously. A good thing to point out here, actually, because the Imperial Palace is massive. And so that's how this stuff isn't seen straight away, because that's probably a slight misconception people have. I think it's said to be 100 kilometers. I think the size of Denmark, you said before. I don't know.
Belgium, I believe.
I don't know how big Denmark is. 100 kilometers, apparently. But they're landing in parts of it. And of course, the custodians are, if you've read, this is what's so cool about 40K and recently is that we've got this book, we've got Regent Shadows, we've got the Vaults of Terror series. These are all covering the same time frame. And you see various characters appearing in multiple books. It's very cool. And there's huge combats as the Dark Angels move to try and find Cypher. Cypher, in the meantime, is up and out. And the first thing that they find is a bunch of their weapons, but they also realise the Lion Sword is not there. I say the Lion Sword, and this is something that's really cool to talk about, because Cypher actually talks for a while in the book about what is the sword. And it was always a theory within the community, oh, maybe it's not the Lion Sword, maybe it's something else, maybe it's a Heavenfall Blade, maybe it's Luther's sword. And the reason that we know that it's the Lion Sword is actually because we have, I don't know if you can see it there, the Lion model, and we have the Cypher model, who is, you won't be able to see, but he's on that shelf, and they both have the same sword. So that's how we actually know that it's the Lion Sword, which is pretty cool, I think, that they kind of revealed it in that way. But they write the books assuming, you might not play the game.
Yeah, I think on top as well, they never say properly it's the Lion Sword, but they do say, oh, it's too big to be wielded by an Astartes. Oh, it's broken into two pieces. And you're just like, I can put one and one together and make two.
And the other thing that Cypher talks about, because when he mentions the Heavenfall Blades, he talks about how the Dark Angels' Heavenfall Blades are keys. You can use them to get into certain sections of the rock. We don't really get much more on this, but this is basically the big theory as to why the Lion Sword is so important. It's a key. It can get into a chamber on the rock. I wonder one chamber on the rock that the Lion Sword could be used to get into. Any ideas, Quipster?
Well, there's two obvious ones. Number one is the chamber the lion was in. And number two, the chamber that Luther is in. Would seem to make the most sense. Because, I don't know if we want to go into this now and jump around a little bit. There are things said later in the novel. Well, basically right at the end, the custodian, the Shadowkeeper, goes, not yet. As if to imply, like, it's not time for Luther to be abound in the universe yet. Like, the whole idea is that the sword is broken, so I don't know. Maybe the Emperor is or being in the presence of the Emperor is the only thing that could fix the sword. Maybe it's not necessarily a sword built of this material plane, that kind of stuff.
So I should say, I'm not entirely sure the sword is broken now. He does talk about the sword being broken, as that's like a theory, and I think that is a nod to Roboute Guilliman breaking the sword. Sorry, I should say. The reason I think it's not broken
he's never
now...
drawn it.
Yeah, he's never drawn it, but also... After the Horus Heresy, so after Guilliman breaks the sword, in Lehman Russ's Primarch novel, Russ and the Lion have one final go. The Lion has one final go at Terra. He stabs Russ through the heart with, I'm pretty sure it's the Lion sword. Although he does talk in the book, Cypher's like, it's hilarious that people think the Lion only ever used the Lion sword. I know when he used to use maces and shields and all this kind of stuff. So I want like 10 different Lion models from GW now. I want loads of different weapons. I think they might do that because they know how much money Primarchs make. So I'm excited.
I mean, to be honest, if Cypher ever comes out as a new model and they give the Lion sword back to the Lion, because it's probably the Lion sword, if that's like an upgrade sprue and you can give the Lion sword again as like a hand swap.
Yeah. In a way, I was so shocked when the Lion came out and he didn't wield the Lion sword, because I just figured Cypher would have gotten it to him in the time frame. It was only like a couple of weeks, but in our time, but in theory, this was a long time. So I figured it would have happened. I liked the lore around his new sword fealty. I thought it was cool, but I was a bit disappointed because I guess now he's got the shield, but it is a huge connection he has with the Emperor, and I was so surprised that they did that. Of course, they've aged the Lion as well.
Yeah, I mean, the aging of the Lion I thought was quite interesting because, like, I think it was you, we were talking about this a while ago, that said the Primarchs are as much made of the warp as they are anything else. And so, like, for example, Magnus and now Korax, their physical body is a manifestation of whatever they want it to be. And so, like, is the Lion's new, aged appearance just a reflection of the fact that he has matured as a character?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And also the fact that I think he thinks he's weaker. That's why he essentially is weaker. Maybe he needed to stretch a bit more once he got up. But I think that's generally the idea. I think the Lion, Son in the Forest book is pretty clear that the Lion thinks he's weaker. However, when you read Shadows of the Past with Corvus Corax, Corvus is very clear, this is what we all are. We are all beings of the warp underneath it. Of course, pretty fundamental 40k lore that the Emperor put warp stuff into the Primarchs. Some people go as far to call them demon princes of the Emperor and that kind of thing. And the reason I actually think they aged the Lion is because Lehman Russ is aged as well. In the end of his Primarch novel, before he leaves, he is described as being grey of hair, much older and very lined in the face and all that kind of thing. So I think when these two come back, when Russ comes back, it's pure 40k for Games Workshop to go, we're going Smash Bros. These two are riding around the galaxy and they are going to just beat stuff to death. And so, I think that's what we all want. And so that's why I think they must have aged the Lion to match that. It was one of those things when I saw, I was like, whoa. And then you kind of thought about it and it actually kind of made sense and it was pretty cool. As this book is a first-person account from Cypher, he does give us some clues as to what his mission is and his identity. The thing is you'd think we know, because actually, it's his point of view, he can tell us who he is. He does say he's a son of the Lion multiple times, so we know it's not Omegon. But at the same time, we don't know who he is, partly because he's kind of insane. Cypher has spent so much time in the warp, so much time with the Harlequins. His journey is so long and arduous over the last 10,000 years. He just doesn't really know who he is. He talks about the power of names. Of course, this is a thing that comes up in multiple books about how important names are. For the Grey Knights, their names give them power. For demons, names give them power. The Emperor, if you found out his name somehow, that would give you power. So that's why he uses the name Cypher. He says it's the only truth he can tell is that his name is Cypher. So yeah, he's got this sword and he kind of isn't actually sure why he's at the Imperial Palace and why he's going to meet the Emperor. He just kind of has it in his being that he knows he needs to get to the Emperor, and then he'll know what to do. This is all point of view, and he's all mad, and he's trying to deceive you. He's basically Deadpool in this book. He's breaking fourth wall stuff, and he's just like, maybe I will call the Emperor, maybe I won't. We'll find out, because I think he's just lost it. I think, my theory is that he, like I say, I think he is Corswain, or he could be Sahariel, but he just doesn't remember.
There's actually another option I just thought of. This one gets pretty wild. So, what if he's none of them? And what if he is Alfaris now? Just kidding. No, but I mean, we've talked about how the Primarchs are made of warp stuff, right? And the final battle at Caliban was this apocalyptic final confrontation between, the Lion and Luthor. One of the things that gets mentioned in some of the later lore is that the bombardment of Caliban by the Dark Angels shouldn't have been enough to crack the planet. And so you've got all these Titanic. Yeah, it's kind of, where did that come from? How did that happen? And it could be, this is wild speculation here, it could be the case that the final confrontation between the Lion and Luthor was so spectacularly apocalyptic that even though Luthor was beaten, and Luthor was beaten so badly he literally had the chaos beaten out of him. Because he survives, but he's like a raving lunatic afterwards, but he's not any longer controlled by chaos. So he literally gets the chaos knocked out of him because he's hit that hard. But then the Lion as well is wounded so badly that he has to go into this 10,000 year coma, essentially. What if it's the case, and we've seen this happen with someone like Magnus, that the Lion was so badly wounded, his essence was separated into like a main shard and like a minor shard, and that minor shard coalesced into a being called Cypher.
It could be something like that. I wouldn't say that's an impossibility, because it is said, the Herald of Sanguinius, who's also the Sanguinor in the Horus Heresy, he becomes like mysteriously powerful in the book Ruinstorm at that point. He has literally will just like appear out of nowhere. And even Sanguinius is like, that guy is really fast. Even for one of my sons, like, he's pretty crazy. There's clearly something in the Sanguinor that is a bit of Sanguinius has put into him. So Cypher is with 10 Fallen in the book. And one thing that I've really liked about Cypher in this novel is how much he genuinely cares for most of the Fallen, it seems. He calls them brothers. He really feels honoured. He's very much driven by brotherhood, which again really fits the Corswain theory over the Sahariel theory. Sahariel doesn't really care that much about the rest of the Fallen. He's just kind of like, you to the Emperor and the Lion. So yeah, I thought that was really cool. And in fact, one of the really interesting relationships, there's a member of the Fallen who is basically been corrupted by chaos, and even he is loved by Cypher, and Cypher is well aware of the fact that he's been corrupted by chaos, and he will probably fully turn at some point, but still he doesn't kill him, and in the end he gets possessed, and Cypher is genuinely very sad to kill his friend.
This is the thing, though, because I was going to mention him. I can't remember his name. The Chaos Marine that falls to, the Chaos Marine, the Dark Angel. Sorry, Freudian slip there. The Dark Angel that falls to chaos. There's still that inner monologue in Cypher that you, as the reader, are aware of, where he says, like, he's my brother, but I could have stopped this progression of him falling into chaos at any time, but I didn't.
So I took that as he could have killed him.
No, I took that as they could have told him to stop, or they could have arrested his journey towards chaos, but they specifically Cypher chose not to, because his new warp abilities were useful. And at the end, when he has to kill this guy, he's falling to chaos, he kind of says like, I could have stopped this, but this is really useful, so I didn't. That was my reading of it.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying you're wrong, because it's, there's a lot of that in 40k books where you can take things different ways. Yeah, I thought it was all about brotherhood. I remember he says, like, I am many things, I am not a hypocrite, though. One of the reasons that's going to come up, I think, is a major point in the future. The Lion has got this ability that he can like sniff out chaos corruption and he can kind of tell very quickly. And this comes up in his novel, and there is one of his sons who actually like betrays the Chaos Space Marines and works for him. but the lion still kills him because he's like, this is the way chaos corruption works. Eventually it gets you. So it's going to be interesting to see when the lion meets Cypher in the setting. Will the lion judge his son guilty of being corrupted by chaos, or will he allow Cypher to join the ranks of the Risen? The Risen are Dark Angels who served Luther on Caliban and may have even fought against the Lion and his forces. However, they did so because they were misled, not because they were corrupted. And so now that the Primarch has returned, he is forgiving members of the Fallen and allowing them to serve with the Dark Angels once more. Certainly in Cypher's book, it's pretty clear that not many of his Fallen actually serve chaos. They're all kind of different. So one of them is like the Fallen in the Lion's book, Son of the Forest, where I didn't hate the Lion, but he attacked us, so I believe he and the Emperor betrayed us. Some follow Luther, some follow Chaos. And there's one member, I don't think they really explain the details of this, but it said he actually met Cypher because he was hunting Cypher for some reason, and he hates Cypher. He hates him a huge amount. And so he is interrogated by a Dark Angel's librarian, and he actually gives up the information that Cypher is trying to get to the throne room. This will come up later. That was me foreshadowing. The Fallen, as they kind of go through the palace, and I'm not going to go through all the fighting. There's a huge amount of fighting, as you can imagine, through the Imperial Palace. One thing that was quite funny, a lot of the veterans within the Imperial Palace are like rubbish. Not like you'd imagine them being the best, because you get there by having like a rich family and you don't do anything most of the time. So they're like all overweight, so they get killed very quickly. They fight their way through the palace. They fight these possessed human beings. And again, like a point to Cypher being a good guy. This is like a very common question. It's like, is Cypher a good guy or a bad guy? The way I read every book, and again, this is my reading, every single time Cypher appears, and he appears to serve chaos, it always happens to come back around and help the Imperium. And here, for example, despite the fact his mission is to get to the throne room, and if he was just evil to kill the Emperor, he wouldn't care about this. When he sees Imperial citizens being slaughtered by possessed in this courtyard area, he still kills the possessed. It costs him time, which is vital for his mission. He clearly does care about people. When they do fight against the possessed and one of the Fallen becomes possessed, the demons do show an interest in Cypher and try to convince him that he should be serving with them. They clearly don't know who he is either, the forces of chaos, because they're like, you're a brother of both sides. You are our Cypher. You will come to us. And he says no. And he is a son of the Lion. As well as the Dark Angels and Hecaron searching for Cypher, the Imperial Assassins are also interested in this elusive figure. I mentioned that the Lion Sword was gone from the Dark Cell's armory when the Fallen went to go get their weapons. The Lion Sword was actually taken by the Assassinorum. I think it was given to them, to be fair. And so this custodian, his Doom Scryer, realizes that if they can get the Lion Sword, Cypher will come to them because Cypher's going to want to get the Lion Sword. And this Doomscry is phenomenally powerful. She gets visions of the future, like paths, and she can also do like telepath stuff. So when she's in Cypher's cell, she sees like a bunch of things, and she sees a figure with a broken sword in his hand. She sees a king on a throne, and she sees a knight asleep on a bed of stone. And these are thought to be Cypher's unborn destinies. I talk about how kind of like Cypher doesn't know what's going on really, and he's a bit mad. She kind of backs this up because she talks about how when she divines Cypher's future, it's not set, it keeps changing. Everything is so random that it's so in flux, his future, that you just can't predict it.
This is the thing. Is it in flux because he hasn't made a decision? Or is something or someone obfuscating on purpose his future so no one else knows what he's doing?
That's a good shout. Yeah, no, I like that. I like that theory a lot. Because clearly, as we'll talk about later, the Emperor is very much aware of Cypher.
Yeah.
The Custodian and the Doomscryer, they go to ask for the sword back from the Assassinorum. And the Assassinorum actually say no. They're like, look, when things are given to us, they're massive dicks. But they're like, when things are given to us, we don't release them under any circumstances because they can be used for whatever reason, blah, blah, blah. And this is a very powerful weapon. It's kind of clever that the way they get the Assassinorum to kind of help them in this regard is by highlighting that technically they still have an active kill order on Cypher. It's thousands of years old by this point, but so many Inquisitors and Chapter Masters have called for kill orders on Cypher that they've had 34 attempts at this and they've never got it done. 4 assassins have died trying to slay Cypher. They've got to do it, and that actually works to get them to actually help out.
I loved that bit because they were like, you know what? This is how we're going to defeat the Order of Assassins, through the power of bureaucracy. Minutiae small print details. Let's go.
What's really funny, going back to the heist thing, we talked about it earlier. Igustu comes up again here. So they believe to start with, if they get the Lion Sword, they'll be fine. Cypher will come to them. However, she then thinks back and she sees back into Cypher's cell, and she realizes when she's seeing the vision that Cypher smiles at her. So he knew that they would do this. He knew that she would look into his future, and so he gives her a bit of a wink, which is objectively hilarious. The reason for that is because he wanted them focused on the sword instead of him getting to the throne room. Anyway, so then they realise, and the assassins also realise, that everyone's got to get to the throne room, right? And this is where it's all going to go down. So Hecaron is in front of the throne room, and this is where things get nuts. So he sees a Dark Angel walking towards him. He starts to confront him. Then he realises that it's not Cypher, and this is where the heist is kind of big part heist is pulled off, because it turns out this has all been orchestrated by Cypher so that these two would take each other down. And so you get a custodian taking on 10 Dark Angels, and it is epic. It's very cool. Within, I think it said 6 heartbeats, the custodian kills 6 Dark Angels. And they do eventually bring him to very near death, but only because they've got a librarian. And, librarian is a good counter to custodians.
The thing I will say about this, normally it is the case that in the books, if they have to take down a custodian, sometimes the writing is awful. Really bad. Good example of this is the Galvorback killing 10 custodians. And you're just like, dude, come on. Just no. That's just my personal quip. Or the bit in the throne room with the Eldar Harlequins who were just casually flicking off and killing custodians. You're just no. But this use of heavy weapons with the missile launcher and the use of a librarian to freeze him in place while they take him out, I really liked that scene, that characterization, because that was the thing I was really worried about, that it wouldn't show the power of a custodian versus the Astartes and what they can actually do and how far below them the Astartes actually are. But I think that scene they pulled off really well.
Yeah, I think it's described, it's like watching a lion fight a pack of wolves.
Yeah.
One of my favourite moves that happens there, I said I wouldn't talk about the fighting too much, but this was really cool. I think there's this bit where Dark Angel takes out a plasma pistol to shoot him, so he cuts off the Dark Angel's arm, and it flies in the air, and then he fires a bolt at the plasma pistol, and so it explodes and takes out more Dark Angels. I was like, that's a great move.
That's a cool move.
One of the things as well that I thought was super interesting about this fight was that the assassins kind of watch it and they don't interfere in the fight. They've got the Dark Angels in their sights that are killing this custodian, and they do nothing because they're like, well, we haven't got a kill order for these Dark Angels, despite the fact they're clearly killing the Emperor's chosen bodyguards. So I thought that was hilarious.
It does really highlight the bureaucratic structures of the Imperium in a really interesting way. You would have thought the most simple decision ever, the guy I'm working with is getting the crap kicked out of him, guess I should help. But no, that's not the thinking at all. The thinking is, no one signed off on this piece of paper to tell me to do a thing, therefore I'm going to not do anything. It just speaks to the entire nature of the Imperium and how it is at that current state in the galaxy.
But ultimately, this custodian does die. And this actually relates to something we talked about in a previous podcast, where Quipster was talking about how the custodians don't dream. This custodian has a dream for the first time in his entire life as he's dying. Hecaron's mind falls into a black sea. He is terrified of his own failure. Cypher has the will, and with the Lion Sword, the means to slay the Emperor. Cypher is death walking, and Hecaron allowed him past the gates. As the custodian lays dying, in his death dream, he sees a phantom. It takes the form of Theta, the voice of the Court of Assassins. The custodian sees a vision of the Eye of Terror. He sees it spill out, consume stars, and create the Great Rift. Then he sees the desolate city. It is filled with ash and dust. This city is something that he has only ever heard of from the insane and the broken. It supposedly exists in the shadow place where dream and vision and nightmare meet. It is both real and not, an unplace, a destination not yet arrived at. Theta tells him that this age darkens and more come here to see what shall become. Hecaron hears a voice on the wind. He turns round a corner of the city. Moving through the dust, he sees a seat of stone upon which sits a man. The hair and skin that wrap his skull are pale. The purple of his robes is ragged. The hands that grip the arms of the throne are spiders of bone. The throne itself is simple, a plain seat without adornment. It sits at the center of a cracked plaza. Both seat and man are small, human-sized to Hecaron's eyes, but somehow they also fill the world by simply being. That one figure on a simple stone chair is the greatest and most terrible thing Hecaron has ever seen. He begins to kneel, though if in reverence or in shock, even he does not know. The eyes inside the sockets are hard and black. Hecaron tries to turn his gaze from them, but cannot, and the figure on the throne is lifting a withered hand and reaching out. Hecaron knows that he is both dreaming and not. He knows that which he has not understood till now. The city is what the Imperium will become, what the Emperor will become, what everything will become. The figure of Theta tells Hecaron what he must do. And for a moment, for a beautiful golden moment, everything that has happened or might happen makes sense.
This very much goes back to this idea of the Emperor has now awakened. That's why he can do this as opposed to doing it before, and he's more empowered by the Great Rift and all this kind of thing. And he gets a message for Cypher.
The custodians take this kind of stuff extremely seriously. It mentions in Watchers of the Throne that the custodians, they don't dream, and the only time they do ever dream is when they're getting direct messages from the Emperor. And they have a whole branch of philosophy they've developed that deals with these visions and these dreams specifically. That's how important they are. They invented a type of philosophy to deal with it. For this custodian to get this dream is such an unbelievable big deal, because it shows the Emperor is abound in the universe. The Emperor is doing things. And that goes back to this idea, who is guiding Cypher? What is his purpose? Honestly, I think it kind of, in a way, has been the Emperor this entire time. What his end goal is something we're yet to determine. But I did think the message that the custodian tells Cypher at the end is both fascinating, a cop-out, and super cool all at once.
I guess before we get to that, what happens to the Dark Angels and the Fallen? This is where we go full heist. And there is this moment where, like, a member of the Dark Angels approaches Cypher, but it's not Cypher, it's a member of the Fallen, and there's another Fallen with a sniper rifle on him, and there's another Dark Angel, and it goes on and on anyway. And so eventually they all fight, and the librarian actually ends up using a bunch of hellfire because one of his brothers dies, and they've killed a custodian at this point. So the Dark Angels start to realize they are so far over the line, and eventually the real Cypher reveals himself, and he gets the sword back, and he finishes off the librarian. And yeah, then he runs into the custodian, and the custodian's message is not yet. Which is, like you say, it's so cool, this idea that the Emperor officially left a message for Cypher. That's amazing. The content of the message, not great. Okay, it could have been better.
It's the premise of it is cool. It's just like, not yet. It implies this grand destiny that, Cypher is part of, and reveals nothing about that destiny whatsoever and leaves it entirely open. It's this moment, and it's super cool in a lot of ways, but it kind of does go back to this idea that they have absolutely no idea what they're doing with Cypher.
I get what you mean, because generally, I think, especially when we look at things like the Horus Heresy, Black Library writers are good at not doing what I call subversion for subversion's sake, which, if you talk about things like Game of Thrones, is where you see that quite a lot. Yeah. And so, generally, if they're going to make a big decision, a big twist, it's going to have some, I talk about stuff, some kind of narrative sense to it. This just reads of like they have no idea what's going on with Cypher. And the obvious thing is that he's going to wake up the lion. So it's like, couldn't you have used some cooler words?
Or just had him go and wake up the lion.
It could have been like something about him being home or something like that. Something that tells Cypher officially that the lion is on the rock. That would have been much better.
If he'd said like, go to him, or your purpose is elsewhere, or you know what I mean?
It also, when he says not yet, Cypher's aim, okay, this is why it's weird. So Cypher's aim at that point was to go into the throne room, and he doesn't really know why. Maybe it was to kill the Emperor, or maybe it was to go and have a chat, or whatever. Ask for forgiveness is the other one. And if that's what he was going to do, when you say not yet, that suggests he's still going to do that at some point. And at the same time, the Emperor has done nothing to tell the custodians, and he can absolutely just put another dream in their head, like, I'll let this Cypher guy through to see me. But he doesn't do that. He doesn't do that at all. So what was the point, Biggie? Why did you do this? Not yet doesn't imply to me that you're going to go and awaken the lion at the right time. But I think that's what they're going to try and explain it as in the future. So it didn't really make sense to me.
Yeah, by this stage in the story, if I'm entirely honest, as far as I'm aware, I think the lion actually is awake as well.
He won't be, no. So this will be just post Siege of Fenris. This will be before the attack on the rock.
Ah, right, okay.
To be fair, it's not clear.
Yeah.
What would make sense to me would be the Emperor's not yet is telling Cypher to wait for the Zechian attack on the rock. That's when Luther gets out. And at that point, sneak in and wake the lion. I should say, one thing that they put into the lore a long time ago that's never come up in 40k is that Cypher, in theory, should have a set of keys that allow him to go through the rock. The reason for that is because Zahariel, who was the Cypher in the Horus Heresy, before he was the Lord Cypher, he was Master of the Mystics, I think was the title, something like that. Basically head librarian on Caliban. And with that, you get a set of keys that allow you to go secret passages through Alderuk, which becomes the rock. So there we have it. After the awakening, as it were, of the Emperor, one of his very first actions is to get a message to Cypher, and that message is not yet. Cypher does acknowledge the message, and although he could move past the custodian and get into the throne room, or at least he's confident he can, he doesn't do that, and he does indeed leave the Imperial Palace. I thought it was weird. It was very cool at the same time. The custodian should have died from his wounds immediately, but the Emperor basically keeps him alive to tell this to Cypher. I just thought narratively it could have had a bit of a more oomph to it than just going not yet.
Yeah, but now it's the case of, okay, what's he doing in the meantime? Essentially, it stops his story, because it's like his entire purpose of what he is as a character is to get to the throne room, and now he's not doing that, so what is he doing that's so important? I liked it overall as a story. I thought it was really interesting. But what I was expecting was for it to push Cypher's story along further than it did. All it did was give us a really good insight into the Shadowkeepers, a really interesting insight into Cypher's mind and how it works, and didn't push his story forward at all. Like I was expecting,
I get what you mean.
Yeah, like I was expecting something on par with, the latest Lion book that's come out, where that pushes forward the Lion story massively. He's abound in the universe. He's doing things. We know where he is. We know what's happening. It's this fantastic exploration of his character as well. And we just don't get that with this book.
So from our point of view, Black Library really needs to think about what they're going to do with the character of Cypher. He is one of the most interesting characters in the setting, a massive fan favourite. I will say though, this book is incredibly fun. I recommend everybody read it. It gives you some really interesting insights into how things like the Imperial Palace work, and as we've said multiple times now, it is like reading Ocean's 11 but set in the most precious place in Warhammer 40k, so I promise you, you'll have a good time. Fingers crossed as well that we get a lot more attention on the character of Cypher in the near future. I think the storyline between Zahariel and Corswain is going to come to a conclusion pretty soon, potentially in the final Siege of Terra novel. Then Cypher's purpose in the galaxy will be known to us all. Furthermore, the Lion is of course also now back, and he is redeeming the Fallen and allowing them to return to the Dark Angels as the Risen. The question has to be asked, what will happen when the Lion and Cypher meet? Not all of the Fallen are able to become the Risen. The Lion will deliver justice to all of his sons who serve chaos. So whoever Cypher is, will he survive his encounter with his Genefather? In the closure of the book, we do find out that the Adeptus Custodes are now hunting Cypher. However, I don't hold out much hope for them, for the elusive Cypher is always one step ahead.